power on.
The following is a presentation of the Sovryn podcast feed.
Woo, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, here for you. And we have got, wow, what an Into the Void this was. Talking trads, well, we get crazy towards the end when we start talking about things like perhaps genetic memory, epigenetics, all this other stuff. You know what it is. It's Into the Void. It's me, it's Sec, it's Penguin. And we just go nuts. And that's exactly what happened on this episode. This was recorded, I want to say it was late or mid to late June. And now it is finally appearing in the Sovryn podcast feed. And I'm excited to share it with you because I think there's very worthwhile conversations had here, especially if you're in more of the, shall we say, the activism space, more of the philosophical bent, and not only that, but then later on getting into perhaps the bio-spiritual sphere. That's a weird term. Not as weird as proto-consciousness field, but it's pretty weird. So anyway, I want you to check this out, okay? I'm not going to do the big intro, but it's always a joy to be a part of the sub-series within the Agora podcast that Sec and Penguin do, that being Into the Void. We've done so many of them now, and we have no intention of stopping. It's a chance for me to really stretch my limbs a bit, and go into some other areas that maybe I wouldn't always on Sovryn Tech, which if you're wondering where's more Sovryn Tech, don't worry, baby. I got your hookup. But for now, check out this Into the Void. I guarantee you something for everybody here to glean from this, including, I would argue, some of the points that I like to bring up towards the end that have to do with, have more to do with biology. These are things I think that need to be paid attention to, and they are certainly themes that will be discussed in the Sovryn podcast feed more going forward because they're important. I don't think there's enough people addressing them or even making others aware of the scope and scale or shall we say the ramifications of, a lot of the research that we have talked about on Sovryn Tech. You're going to hear me talk about that a little bit later on. But it's important stuff to get out there. But everything that gets talked about on Into the Void, I mean, Penguin drops his bangers. Sec, of course, is just bringing his usual, especially his very impressive historical knowledge, among other things, into the mix. And always love his questions. In fact, if you're not getting the Q&As in the Sovryn Tech Patreon feed, first off, go to sovryn.patreon.com. Get on that, okay? But Sec will ask a ton of questions, and they're all gold. They're all dynamite. And I get to get really weird. Talk about stretching my limbs and, my mental faculties. Like, he definitely taxes them, and as part of the reason I love calling him a friend and a brother. And so, anyway, check that stuff out on the Patreon feed if you're not already a part of that, some of which you've heard when I've released a taste of Q&A and so on. But to hear all three of these minds come together, not necessarily as one, but certainly in an interesting way, check out this Into the Void, and I will see all of you. I'm going to let it ride itself out, and I will see all of you, on the other side.
Just for back, it's your home for agorism, localism, anti-authoritarian concept, and radical decentralization. And as you've been hearing, it's me, Sec, and Brian Sovryn as usual for this isn't Into the Void, right? Of course, right?
Totally.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. Well, I don't know how much of that earlier segment we're going to leave on, but we have decided to discuss a couple of really interesting topics. They're all interesting, but all the choices were interesting, and we still had to make a choice. And so, before we get into that, how's everybody doing today?
Fucking living the dream.
I've been up since 4 o'clock this morning with food poisoning, and I've been working out in the sun all day. It's been a good time.
Oh man.
Yeah, so my brain is a little fried, but that's not necessarily anything different than any other time. But yeah, happy Father's Day. It'll be Father's Day tomorrow when we're recording this. It'll be after Father's Day when you hear this. But happy Father's Day to any fathers out there. I'm going to try to do very little tomorrow, so we'll see how that goes and play with the kids. But yeah, my brain is pretty. I'm old. I don't do well if I don't get enough sleep, and haven't been feeling well all day and just cooking in the fucking sun. But other than that, I'm doing just fucking dandy.
Right.
Brian, how you doing?
Yeah, doing all right. I'm probably going to be tripping balls later, so that's all good.
Fuck yeah. Wait, have you? Does the public know about that?
I mean, I'm pretty open about it. I've mentioned it on Instagram, so I don't think there's Oh
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm as open as I can be about it. Yeah.
Right on. Welcome to the fucking club.
Yeah. The 10,000-year-old club. Yeah.
Yes. At least.
I'm gonna need a mascara everywhere and psilocybin and who knows what else. Anyway, yeah, but yeah, things are all right. Busy as usual. Lots of projects going on, but otherwise, doing good.
Oh, I just realized why Penguin asked if this was an Into the Void, because you've been on for 2 other Dynamite episodes. Everybody listening to this should go back and listen to those. But the debate you had on here with Jeremiah Harding on AI, that was fucking awesome. And then the panel on 2 panels.
Two panels, right? I'm releasing one of them right now, and it's definitely 2 of them. Yeah. So we haven't done a void in a minute.
No, it's been a while.
Yeah, no, the spirituality panels, really enjoyed those. So definitely, folks, if you haven't listened to either episode, go do so now.
I know, and unfortunately, I might open a can of worms with that, because that's like the type of thing that it might not ever end. It's a discussion that goes on forever. Okay, so we'll dive right into this. Something that's been concerning me lately, and it might just be a sign of the times, but there's a certain flavor of like trad right wingers that says that I hear saying things that that sound like me about 50% of the time or something, right? And then they go into a bunch of other stuff that I don't agree with about, I don't know, tradition in the family and whatever the thing, but they have some various critiques that almost sound like something Michel Foucault would have said 35 years ago or whatever, but about modernity and sort of materialism and the almost an anti-work vibe I get from some of them. Like, it's sort of meaningless to just go work at a fucking shitty job for 40 years just to get money when, and of course the thing is like, oh, you should be more concerned with like your family and the community and whatever the thing. And I don't know, there's a lot of, like a Ted Kaczynski vibe I get from a lot of them. And it seems to me like almost weirdly anti-capitalist in a way. Not that there is necessarily against property, but it's almost like, okay, so I'll give you 2 like other examples that I think are sort of similar to this. Like, there was resistance in Nazi Germany during the rise of the Nazi. So during the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany, prior to that, it was an aristocracy and a monarchy. Well, sort of. And so there was resistance to the new Nazi Party from what you might call the right, the aristocracy, the old German, princes and dukes and whatever the thing. And they were sort of against the Nazi Party as like the new modern thing. And they wanted to keep it sort of, pre-modern in a sense. They wanted to keep Germany pre-modern, so warrior code and honor culture and all this kind of stuff. So there was resistance to the Nazis in that way. And this is kind of what I'm seeing. It's a very similar thing now, where you almost have like, in our lifetime, we thought of Republicans as like pro big business and pro capital. But there's a new sort of right emerging that's even like more traditionalist in the sense that they're against modernity, and they almost are desire something pre-modern and, you know, sort of anti-capitalist or pre-capitalist. And a similar thing happened during the beginning of the forming of the United States. Is they wanted landowners to be the ones that had have a vote. Now, people think of this as like a pro-capitalist move, but this was kind of like a so the capitalists were seen as like degenerate, flamboyant, the new capitalist class in America. They weren't landed, most of them. They had, you know, a flat in Paris, and they had a nice place in Manhattan, and they bounced around. They weren't tied to the land in the way that like the old money who were landed were tied to the land, or the poor farmer who owned land. They were seen as like being tied to the land and pious, right? It was a lot of a religious fervor with this idea. So it was actually more so they felt that the new capitalist class didn't have any ties to the land or the nation state. They were more like internationalists in a sense, because they were everywhere all at once, and the reason for their power was not because they owned land, but because they had money, and that was the reason the landed you might call them aristocracy wanted to like sort of hone in the power of the capitalists, because they were seen as like, you know, like upstart, new money, nouveau riche, like what's the opposite of pious? Like just kind of degenerate. They were seen as like degenerate. What the right would call degenerates now. So that was more of like an anti-capitalist move, but from the older right wing, rather than like labor, right? So I think, and it's fucking weird, there is some overlap in though all people who critique what we would call modernity for lots of correct critiques, but for vastly different reasons. And I don't know if this is just like a sign of the times, or I don't know, but it concerns me how much I agree, or actually, no, they agree with me. I had the idea fucking first, fuck off. How much they agree with things that I am concerned with, while our conclusions and solutions may be vastly different, but at least in terms of critiques of, like I heard, I heard a clip from like, let's say Tucker Carlson, like critiquing wealth accumulation and how that is a vapid end goal, and your goals should be, your close family and your community and blah, blah, blah. And to me, that sounds fucking highly anti-capitalist, and I would fucking mostly agree with that. And then you had, I heard, I don't even know who these people were, but I heard two other like neo-reactionaries, and they were talking about how, our entire society is like materialist, and everybody, he's like, I would much rather like make my child a gift and give that to them rather than buy them a bunch of cheap plastic at Walmart, because there's at least like meaning in that, in passing something down to your children that you made with your own hands. And it's like, well, yeah, fucking absolutely. So I think we're in this weird situation, like maybe even this might harken back to like the like coalition against the New Deal, where you had a like radical left wingers and like classical conservatives all against the New Deal, and it was like the center that was a proponent of like the New Deal. So I don't know. I'm rambling here, and my brain is fucking shot. But like, and I don't know how to wrap this up into something. But does anyone else see what I'm seeing? And are you as concerned as I am?
Yeah. It's a great topic, and it's something that I've thought about a lot over the past like 2 years. I've had a lot of thoughts and a lot of different directions I'm going in since starting the podcast. But I mean, going back like 3+ years ago, like Sek, you were the guy that kind of taught me about how a lot of conservatives are anti-capitalist, and there's a lot of anti-market, there's the anti-market right, anti-market left and everything. And I've really, like, in the past year or so or more, I've actually really delved into a lot of different things and a lot of different outlets and tendencies, I guess I could say, that have emerged that aren't really new. They're just like everything's always just rehashing older ideas and combining older ideas and putting them in new context for new times. But there's definitely a lot of truth to what you're saying. So I don't see, first of all, when there's a critique of something that's bad, it's not surprising. Like, if there's something that has negative aspects to it, let's just say that. Let's just not say it's objectively bad, but if it has negative aspects to it, I'm not surprised that different people want to have critiques to it. And those critiques certainly could be convergent. I've been listening to, I get like one of my news roundup podcasts are from like a classical Marxist and left conservatives and like right wings, like traditionalist sock dems that couldn't be more hostile to like the market and capitalism. But they're all very smart folks. So I listen. I certainly don't agree with a lot of that, but I mean, there's a lot of different, outside of the standard dominant, Republican Democrat sort of retail politics, big, corporate TV kind of, which is still where most people are at, but thinking people that do not confine themselves to the tight strictures of electoral politics. Like, there is a lot of, and I think probably always have been, a lot of variation from that. So one thing you mentioned, of course, is the idea that we grew up with. I grew up in the 90s when I was like a kid, basically getting my idea of the world in the 2000s as well, I guess, high school and college. And the idea was that the conservatives were like, their rhetoric was like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but this was post-Reagan. So this was post what like leftists and now anti-market rightists call like neoliberalism. So it's Reagan, Thatcher, and so. It's austerity, privatization, deregulation. It's that economically rightward or more market or more pro-capitalism bent after the post-New Deal mid-century era. And we grew up with equating Republicans with conservative and equating, which is a very, very, very broad-ranging topic, like conservative in comparison to what, right? And relating conservative to capitalist business markets, which I don't know, those words for me, just because I deal with this is like where my ideas deal with, like those words have vastly different connotations with me. I don't like business. Like I like, operating a business or engaging in trade and commerce, but like business, like it's I certainly get it. And in capitalism, we've had the endless discussions of capitalism. Don't need to rehash that, even though we probably do have new listeners. Like the connotations of capitalism and the connotations that an ANCAP has on capitalism versus the average person, which does equate that with like essentially a type of like corruption or cartelization or a public choice problem, with the ability of the corporate class, the wealthy class, the capitalist class to influence policy, for their benefit and or more importantly, in all cases, basically foisting costs and risks onto society. Famously, like there are people that will refer to say capitalism, oh, that's right-wing socialism. And I mean, there's a point to that when you have certain bents. But not to go off too much in that tangent, yeah, I think that there is and have always probably been a right-wing strain. Well, I'll say this: after the whole political mode of like establishment Republicans, the pro-capitalists, we got to get rid of regulations and say we're going to shrink the government and whatever they do in that regards. I mean, I remember I grew up in my formative years with George W. Bush. He didn't shrink the government; he invaded countries and vastly expanded the national security state and all that stuff. And that was, I could go on and on about that because that's my formative time. But now that like we're basically in the era of Trump and populism and various different movements, Bernie and the DSA, like we always go with post-Occupy, the political paradigms are ready to be changed, like shattered, like things are more decentralized as far as ideas come. The idea landscape is more decentralized. We have national conservatives and national populists that are, I don't even go into those tendencies. But you do have a lot of people that I followed that are intimate being, in some cases, intimate being very friendly, kind of center right, or traditionalist. In some cases, intimate being like very far to the right, or fascist, sympathizing. The whole spectrum of avant-garde kind of artsy new right people that all, without a doubt, come from the left, all without, and there's new right-wing avant-garde. These folks bring with them, and maybe not in a bad way, but bring with them, I mean, I certainly don't identify with left-wing in any way at all, but bring with them the good and the bad, a lot of baggage from the left. The idea being that, like, for example, post Bernie, that new left movement shattered, and a lot of people went kind of avant-garde right, Catholic traditionalism. Some people doing, like, I don't know, art hogue Catholic trad cath kind of performative stuff, and some people going to like, oh yes, I am a traditional Catholic, and Catholic social teaching teaches us that we need a robust social safety net and welfare state that promotes the family and that promotes promotes the well-being of all classes of people, and so. These tendencies do exist. I followed them quite a bit. I followed a lot of the right quite a bit, whether you might call this the dissonant right or not. And some of what you described, Sek, are just other niches I can identify. Like, these are not the same exact people, but these are other niches. So if you want to equate the right with just the electoral right, then, I mean, that's been shattered too. Yes, you can go back to that pro-capitalism kind of late 20th century, 1980s, 1990s, conservative, capital C conservative politics. But I mean, if you're going to have a real political spectrum that says, like, okay, everybody's basically in their own minds and their own framework thinking of like what's best and what's perhaps liberatory, but what's like best for their view of society, like, of course, like the dominant capitalist, liberal globalist kind of framework, which is dominant in our society. It's the base of our society in the Marxian sense. That is a completely a child of, and like completely the domain of, the political center, the Democrats, the moderate Republicans, the John McCain's, the Mitt Romney's especially, but the whole establishment, but the Democrats for sure, the whole globalist, liberal, the right wing of the Cold War, but now the very touchy-feely kind of center left, pro-capitalist, pro-globalist, pro-trade, liberal project. I'm sorry, I'm kind of losing my train of thought there, but that's definitely the domain of the center. Definitely the values, the ethos put forth is coming from the center. It's coming from the center. It's often coming from the center left. It's often appropriating from the center left and the kind of progressive left. But people to the right obviously don't see those institutions. They don't trust them, and they don't see them serving them at all. And that has a long, like you mentioned, historical precedent.
Yeah, I mean, I it kind of feels like they're just conceding defeat, and I don't necessarily mean defeat in a negative sense, right? There's the old saying that an unwinnable battle isn't a losing one, but I think that's what they're realizing, along with a lot of other people as well. In fact, I'm kind of surprised it took this long for trads to kind of get to this point. I remember, and I look back on this with some shame and regret. I remember when I was into Glenn Beck for a little while. Collective laugh can be had by the podcast listeners. But he was really, really pushing for this, not just for like a certain political conservatism. He also did, I mean, to his credit, like as far as putting libertarianism out there and even anarcho-capitalism and things like that out there, he definitely put a lot of that on the map. People may not want to give him that credit, but he actually does deserve it, even if I think he's insane. But he was really pushing for people not to just get back into like the writings of the quote unquote founding fathers in America, but I feel like he was always pushing for people to like get back to that kind of culture and get back to that kind of lifestyle, I mean, I wouldn't say he was necessarily arguing for people having slaves. Maybe that's why the trads are excited about anti-markets or something, is because, I'm anti-work because, I want to bring back slavery. I don't know. But regardless, yeah, I'm kind of amazed it took this long, but at the same time, I do feel like a lot of the varying aspects of the right, it's just like libertarianism was, I would argue, between 2008 to 2016 or so. It really is very much an online thing. I mean, yes, there's small town conservatism and all that, things that you could argue are what put Trump in power previously and all of this. But a lot of these, larger concepts or broader movements that seemingly, liberals or whoever are reacting to online a lot of times it's just people posting, shit posting on Twitter, on X, or on Threads or, whatever it's been for the quite the past few years. And they're probably coming to the conclusion that I think, honestly, a lot of libertarians came to, which is that none of this is working. Like just typing, being a keyboard warrior online isn't doing shit for anybody. And when you come to that realization, I think you start to see that, like, wait a minute, like there's no solution within the system itself. And so when I say you can see defeat, it's like, okay, either I can be, I can start as a minimum wage or less than that worker at McDonald's and hopefully get them to, I don't know, start offering healthy food at some point, but eventually you realize, holy shit, no, the system is just too big, too corrupt. And like, there's so much food science and whatever else, it's never going to happen. McDonald's is always going to sell shit to you. And I think maybe a lot of them are feeling that, which is what many, not just trads, but many movements, like you're saying, Sec, I mean, like many people have, is that, no, I want out. There's no saving any of this. Now, the sad part is, because they're trads, they're also still going backwards, right? Ultimately, which is why I worry what exactly that would look like for them, even though I would also applaud, like, quote unquote, going back to some kind of pre-internet concept. But you ultimately have to move forward. You have to learn from it and, see where you can take it next and get beyond it, or at least know this isn't the direction that we want to go. And, maybe they're feeling that. I mean, I'm still always baffled that there are, for example, that there are, within, like, say, feminism. Now, feminism has multiple waves, right? But within feminism today, you have the concept of TERFs, which TERF is just an acronym, but it basically means like feminists that are against transgender people. That makes no sense to me, whatsoever. Just like I think this, where we have trads that are actually, agreeing that the system sucks, because we usually think of conservatives as like, guardians of the familiar, where they're trying to keep things propped up. And instead they're looking to go back. it's mind blowing to me. I want to say I have seen it to a degree as well. In fact, I even think I heard somebody once call it like the tragedy of the trads, which is very funny. But ultimately, if you don't actually evolve forward, I don't think you're going to get to where you want to go. It's always going to end up, because maybe they're thinking going backwards is going to get them to where they do actually have control. I mean, what gets anybody into a movement, or, kind of quote unquote radicalize. And I use that term kind of gently, radicalize someone into an ideology or things like this. Usually it's because you don't feel like you have control anymore. And sure, I think most of us feel that way today due to, surveillance society, a million other things. But what do you got, Sek?
Yeah, I think that's the fundamental difference between, say, us and them is they want to go back where, like, it's to keep things simple, it's a pre-modern versus post-modern, right?
Yeah, I like that. Yep.
Yeah. So we wanted to move past whatever this is, call it whatever buzzword you like, and they would like to return, but there is a strange amount of overlap, more than I feel comfortable with. You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of one of those things where where was I going with that? Yeah, we used to think of conservatives as wanting to prop up the status quo, but should we take it as a win that there's a significant faction of them that no longer buy into like consumerism or business, or like I hear them critiquing things like landlords and interest and or usury and lots of things, and like I said, like wage labor itself. And sure, they would probably want to go back to some sort of like parochial, like artisan pre-modern society, and that's not necessarily that's not my jam. But should we take it as, I'm not saying like let's team up or whatever, but should we take it as a win that maybe this is a sign of tides shifting? Like, even what does it mean when the right like no longer accepts the status quo? For a long time the left was supposed to be the either the wanted to reform or tear down the status quo, whereas now it's the significant portion of the right also does. And should we take this as a win in some way? What do you think?
Yeah, I certainly sympathize with like where these people are coming from. I mean, I think we have to look at is that a lot of the views that there's a certain definition of conservative, small c conservative, which does mean just conserving this a status quo. That doesn't really explain the nuances of like any particular political agenda or anything. But I think we have to look at a lot of tendencies over time, over history, as being kind of products of their time, as being very contextual to like the circumstances at the time, and also like to some extent, I mean, there's also the way to analyze it is like being kind of intentional. So I think some of this work is a real big blank space that I guess I may just have to bring out some heavy books if I really want to get into it. But some of this stuff, or if you know somebody that's an expert on this, but some of I think Rothbard's and others' works on how the old right was kind of after World War II and the dawn of the Cold War was kind of transformed into kind of what was then modern, mid to late 20th century, maybe early 21st century, but certainly mid to late 20th century capital C conservatism, which certainly was like a different animal. But I mean, it is and I guess there's also that I do have a pretty decent understanding of the very basics of like mid 20th, late 20th century politics. And we mentioned this on the pod before, where the Democrats, the left, they come out of basically FDR and the New Deal. I'm sure there are antecedents to that, but it was basically very popular. And I mean, obviously that can't be disconnected from the war. And there's all these arguments against the New Deal. but that was the very basis, is kind of carry on this mid-century post New Deal construct through the 70s, which weren't a great era either. I'm not saying it worked fantastically, but it worked great for a lot of people. It really got a lot of people. I mean, you can't reproduce the circumstances of World War II, so take this with just huge grains of salt. But like, there are some aspects of the mid 20th century governance, as heavily like interventionist as it was, of like it was a society where a lot of people were able to, I mean, this is materialism, so be that as it may, the people were able to rise into the middle class. Home ownership shot up dramatically. People owned cars. People owned multiple cars. And not only that, there was an aspect and there was like organized labor was a thing that was, supported by society, supported by government, where people had good wages and good benefits plans. I'm just saying, this is obviously things that people liked when they worked, in the time and place where they worked. They said that this was basically a time where like a union factory worker or a foreman could have a nice ranch house and a car or two in the driveway, and like the company's executive would also just have a bigger mid-century modern, nicer ranch house with like a nicer car, like maybe a Cadillac or whatever, or a Plymouth, whatever the nice car. I don't know. I know the Cadillacs were the top of the lines. But there was a certain flatness to society, like the ratio of like the line worker's salary to the executive salary was so much lower. And there was a certain egalitarianism to that, like, post New Deal, center left kind of world that they're living in. So that defined the left. What defined the right was basically the Christian conservatives, the anti-communist hawks, which was the closest to like fascists, basically, as far as their hardcore, militarism and anti-communism. And then the classical liberals, and then they injected the kind of economics, we gotta so interest rates, we gotta keep on the gold standard and not have like runaway spending, and we can't have runaway deficit spending and blah blah blah, and all that small government stuff that kind of continued on. But the point being is that was kind of a compromise to like what is going to be the opposition party to the New Deal party, right? And then that became a big deal in the late 70s, and actually started with Carter, but into Reagan and such, with the privatization and all and whatnot. Because we had price controls and heavy government intervention for a good chunk of the 20th century. So that was a heavily government interventionist era, all in the name of course, fighting Stalin and the Soviets, and I guess the Chinese. But that, laying that groundwork, just to say that is a snapshot in history. That's generations ago. Those people are all dead. I mean, we've got the elderly that were, grew up in that time, the baby boomers, but then people that were little kids at the end of it, like the Generation X. But like, that was a snapshot in time, and we're generations beyond that. We're all old guys now. Like, there are people in well below us that have none of the context we have, that are now able to like vote and be adults and participate in discourse and whatnot. So that could not remain fossilized forever, and that's just degrading. It's just that some of those old politicians are now up in their 80s and 90s and still alive, so we kind of have this drag back on us. But like, this idea we have of what's the left and what's the right, excluding like the weird left and the really weird right, that's so contextual. And I think it's basically, I mean, just to relate it to the election now, it's really basically being anchored by people that are really, really old and still in politics, but their politics are basically already fossil. They're basically already political fossils.
Yeah. I'd add on top. I think the generational point is spot on. I mean, one of the, it's kind of it's a common derision I've made against communism and capitalism that like these are both 19th century ideologies, and we live in a wildly different world. I'm not the biggest fan of Steven Pinker, but I think he might have made this point in one of his books that, we have more in common with someone from, like 19th century Japan than we do with an American from, say the 17th or the 18th century. Just because there is that time of modernity, there's like modernity, and then there's the ancient world, and modernity actually really hasn't been around that long. But the bottom line being is, again, we live in a exceptionally different world today. And the ideologies that that people are supposedly defending, conservative, liberal, whatever, do not speak to the world today really at all. And I think that's a big part of probably what a lot of these people are feeling. To answer your question, Sec, I mean, is it a win? Well, kind of like I mentioned with Glenn Beck earlier. Like, look, I think Glenn Beck's nuts. Like, I don't recommend anybody really listen to him. But at the time, he really did a lot, along with, like, say, Ron Paul and others, of getting ideas out there on mainstream, through mainstream channels. I mean, screw Fox News, but at the same time, lots of people watch it. Some incredibly radical ideas got out through these people. Now, you don't want to listen to them all the way, but just to get this stuff, it's just enough. There's seedlings, perhaps, to get someone thinking in a certain direction. And so not only that, so I guess I would take it as a win, and I take it as a win in the sense that we're really all in a prison. I mean, it's kind of a gilded cage, but we're all in a prison. And if all the gangs work together to get out, no, I don't want to work with them. Okay. But I mean, if all the gangs have the same concept, look, we need to get out of this prison, even if you have vastly different ideologies, as long as the idea is that, no, we're in a prison, this is bad. I take that as a win, and not only as a win, but it even comes off, oddly enough, as a vindication of my own ideas. Because I don't know about you guys. I mean, for me, I'm constantly like thinking to myself, wait a minute, am I just nuts? Am I just insane in whatever I happen to be thinking? And so I always feel a little bit better when there's some kind of, not that it's an appeal to authority, but when there's something out there that actually, kind of regurgitates back whatever I ever happen to poorly say or think. So I would say ultimately it is a win. And, again, I'm looking forward to a world where a lot of different ideologies can be expressed. I'm not supportive of trads by no means, but are there different lifestyles in mind that are going to be out there on planet Earth if it were, closer to the chaotic paradise that I'd love to see? Oh, of course there is. So, I mean, Sec, what do you think? Do you think it's a win overall?
Well, number one, I just wanted to say that I don't ask myself that question anymore. I know I'm pretty far insane. So
yeah, I was being racist, but yeah,
I come to terms with that a long time ago. No, I think in a weird way it is a win, if not solely for the reason that it's like a barometer. It's a sign of, like you said, that we are onto something, and there's other people that are coming to similar conclusions for different reasons. And as long as, like you said, they're all pointing like, hey, we got to get out of this prison. I like that analogy. I'm fine with that. we're not going to be like, I'm not going to invite them for a barbecue or whatever the thing, but I think it just goes to show like how shitty the system really is, to the point where, I mean, you got people all across the political spectrum that are like, no, this is not what we signed up for. Like, this is not, it doesn't even do what it supposedly promises to do, never mind anything else. So I think the more people that walk away, the better. I just think it's fucking weird. You know what I mean? Like, it's just very strange bedfellows. You know what I mean? Like, it just weirds me out sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's really a sign that this is all going to pop, sooner or later.
You're right. Yeah.
And because when even the batshit people are saying, oh no, this isn't right. This isn't going to last.
Okay. Well, I mean, to answer that, first of all, like, I think they're wrong for reasons that I think I'm the odd man out here. I think they're wrong for reasons. Well, I don't know who we're saying is they. It's a wide collection of people. I think most of these people are wrong for completely different reasons than you guys. It's not so much the association with the preceding viewpoints. It's that I think that basically, like, markets of a sense, certainly like a principle down, like libertarian sense, markets and non-intervention really. And of course, like we've always said since day one of this podcast, like actual non-intervention. So all down the primary interventions, but like free markets and competition and basic principles like that actually do work. And no, a right-wing socialism, whether it's traditionally Catholic or whatever, is not going to work. And that this kind of like fiat money environment and everything that they've created, and I'm kind of on that train finally, it's like does kind of destroy family values, and maybe it destroys family values in multiple ways, and maybe some of those ways aren't what the baseline like right view of like social degeneracy. But I think down the line there, I mean, there's work's been done on this. I haven't picked up any of those books yet, but like I think it, if you're making family formation difficult, if you're making people too economically precarious to make family formation difficult, and making raising children difficult, and changing the economics of that, is that now a left-wing pro-family take? I mean, these are all just labels. These are all very contextual labels. Is it not right-wing now that you're talking about economic precarity and or maybe what you might call economic justice? Does that suddenly become a left-wing talking point where it was previously a right-wing talking point? Well, clearly, there's plenty of people that are right-leaning in many ways, or would consider themselves part of the capitalized R right, that would have such ideas. Now, I think there's certain libertarians that have great answers to this, and certain other people on the right that would have some good ideas, but relatively poor answers to this, very hostile to libertarians. But I don't think that suddenly makes a left-wing critique right, or a right-wing critique left, or these are left conservatives, or these are right-wing socialists, or so-and-so. Well, yeah, the reason we end up coming up with those hyphenations, is because like ideas don't really split down that path. Plus, I'm also pretty sympathetic with, I guess you might say trads or people on the right. One thing, I use Brian Kaplan's definition of the right, which is basically the left hates markets. I'm paraphrasing. The left hates markets. The right hates leftists. It's basically all the people that are against the left, and it really has been, because there's no actual other categorical definition that really gets the right all categorized together, the entire broad right, unless you basically use that definition, and basically that's how you categorize the broad left as well. But yeah, as a practicing Muslim, yeah, I'm certainly adjacent to trads. I'm certainly adjacent to like that kind of viewpoint. And yes, there's a hostility to capitalism, and of course, religiously strong hostility to usury and interest. And I'm very stoked to see that people are like questioning that, going back to, the pre-whatever medieval period Christian view that usury is forbidden and socially degrading. That's why I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. It's the one thing that really separates me from these guys, besides like the textbook definition of capitalism involving like private cities or whatever. But the definition of anarcho-capitalism that we believe in. But like some of these ideas, yeah, like maybe we should rethink how things are. And then I don't quite see like communist and like what I'm going to use obviously the niche term left-wing market anarchists and whoever mutualist and social democrats as having like a postmodern or forward view, and saying that people on the right that are like against the capitalist hegemon have a regressive view, because obviously plenty of communists and anarchists have a view of like ideal society that's much more in line with like a French peasant's life circa 1750 or 1800. You know what I mean? And also like plenty of right-leaning people have been futurists. I've been absolutely very forward thinking in certain ways. Fascists were futurists and centrists, by the way. But So I think all these labels are contextual, and basically it gets kind of wonky when you get too hung up in these labels. That's why I try to be specific about not like, oh, just a right leaning, this person's this far to the right of center, or this person's this far to the left of center. Nonsense, by the way. But I try to basically apply actual labels that actually describe the things that come out of their mouth.
Yeah, two quick points. One, if you can tell everything about a person just by the label that they use, that person's not a serious thinker. Like, you can't possibly be, if you just toe some kind of weird quasi-party line. Like, that just doesn't make sense.
Well, I don't trust self-applied labels that much either. That's another thing.
Right. Yeah. And the other point is, and again, this speaks more to this, I think, being a win. I mean, because especially a lot of what you're hitting at, Penguin. I mean, these people are questioning authority. Questioning authority has its own value. Questioning authority isn't about being right or wrong. It's about questioning authority, and that's it. And it itself, doing that in and of itself, is a good it's a valuable thing to do. And so, yeah, again, I take it as a win. Sec, what do you got?
No, Penguin comes in with the fucking bangers sometimes, man. He just goes on a rant, and you're just like, yes, yeah, like every point is
This is all pin up. I'm so stoked that you came up with this topic, though.
No, but back to your thing about the markets and the fiat currency, sort of destroying the family. Yes, I agree. I am more pro market than these trads, and my lifestyle is weirdly accidentally more trad than even most of these trads. I mean, I guarantee you most of these trads don't know how to fucking plant a garden. You know what I mean? So, a lot of them, city boys, a lot of them, I've seen a lot of that. But the fiat currency and, inflationary, monetary policy, it absolutely does destroy the family. And look, man, like, back to my life being weird. Like, I'm a simple dude. I'm a family guy. I work hard. My life is, fairly what you might call traditional, like sort of acts by happenstance mostly. Like, this is just how I like to live. The difference being, I think, between myself and like most traditionalists is they believe this to be like an objective universal good. Like, how I live or how they wish to see things is like good for all people, and I don't believe that to be true. It just happened to work out based on circumstances of my own family to work out this particular way. Like, I'm the head of the household, I'm the sole provider and all that sort of thing, and it worked out that fucking way. It works out, and I'm a country guy. I like my life simple and quiet, and like I like to grow my own food and in the sticks. So like, yeah, so where was I going with that? So I'm a family dude. I understand how, monetary policy affects my life. I saw and it affects everybody's life really, but even more so when you have kids are expensive, when you have the expense of children. So the inflation hits you fucking harder, and it makes it harder to do certain things for your kids and for whatever the thing. And you got to work fucking harder. So like all those things are true. The difference being, I think, and it's a significant fucking difference, is that most trads would believe that particular lifestyle of having a family and, the man as the head of household and traditional sort of gender roles are like objectively good for all people in all circumstances. And I don't believe I'm a subjectivist at heart. I don't think that's true at all. I think there's lots of different ways that lots of different people have lived and can live throughout history and in the future. My way of doing things is not necessarily everybody's way. It just works for me, and that's it. That's the only claim I ever make. Whatever, however other people want to live, that's fine also. But I do think the state sort of crowds out, family and community bonds that would solve a lot of these a lot of issues that humans face, and all of that is true. And I'm sure the financial system is certainly not helping that at all. Especially, it has all sort of like secondary and third effects on like even like food and the way we organize ourselves and the way we raise families and the way we live and fucking what we're going to do with our lives. All of these things, it certainly affects all those things systemically. I don't disagree with all of that, and I don't think it's markets that are the problem. I agree with you there, Penguin, but that would be the main differences. Like I said, that for the fucking third time, that these people think that it's the only way to be and to return to some traditional ideal. And I don't think there is. I mean, number one, even if everybody agreed to that, I don't think there is any returning to something before our current society. But there's certain, I'm sure certain people would like certain aspects of traditional life. Cottagecore is a thing for sure. But I mean, I'm a let the chips fall where they may kind of a guy. But we can talk about this forever. If you guys have anything else on this, or we can switch to something else, because I think
one last thing.
Tackled this. What?
Yeah. One last thing. Well, two last things. So 2 points. I feel like I'm losing one of the points when you said that. Yeah, let me just go to the second point. I think one addendum that I would like to say to have to this discussion is basically, so again with the labels, and it's like labels are actually just words. They're actually just fake, and they're completely contextual. So we're not even doing postmodernism, but this is like a postmodernism. Nothing's real. It's all your depends on your standpoint. But generationally, what I've noticed is that generationally for many generations since these, like Brian points out, 19th century ideologies came out, like you have vastly different people sorting to the right and the left. 1950s, like the most macho guys were like Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, and communists were like, you could see the Soviet propaganda posters, the communists were all these big, muscular, blonde-haired, like basically Aryan men, big, broad-chested farmers and strong jawlines, and there was this strong aesthetic. There was just it's like suaveness and manliness and masculinity and a sense of adventure, and that was an area where tons and tons and tons of young people were legitimate full-on communists, like full-on, like Stalin's doing a great job over there, guys. And all the most thinking people, I mean, obviously there are a lot that were very important, to some of the ideas we talk about, but a lot of thinking people and a lot of creative people were full-on communists, full-on like, wow, that was really going to transform the world kind of deal, like full-on party members. Or there was also a strong trade union left that was less involved with the foreign communist movements. But and then the type of, but even in my lifetime, I mean, that obviously contrast that to the communists of like today, like not even just stereotypically, but go just look at any left-leaning person and the values that are, I mean, they're generally not very physically strong and often disabled, and often not even if they're not visibly disabled, will list you a list of disabilities that they have, which goes to self-identity. I'm not trying to be ableist or anything, but goes to like self-identification and the values that they actually put forth. And even in my lifetime, the idea of like the kind of leftists that supported Bernie through like 2016, the whole ways, and then kind of when the whole mess of, I mean, a lot of people don't know about the entire mess of, but I've heard it on like various podcasts and stuff on YouTube, but like the whole mess of the 2016 Democratic primaries and how they shot down Bernie supporters so much, and all that woke stuff was, again, just like Occupy, weaponized against, I hate using the word woke, by the way, but all that stuff, that really extreme socially left-wing stuff was weaponized and used against Bernie to try to like diminish Bernie's support among people who are like class-based socialist leaning people, and the kind of people that now kind of push a lot of left-wing causes post 2016 that are very much either pussy hat wearing a liberal feminist, or like very extremely gender ambiguous people. I think a lot of that was very intentional, because like like Bernie's groundswell support was very populist. The point being is a lot of people I noticed that would have gone left in any generation before now are going to the avant-garde far right and having a quote unquote fascist aesthetic and doing cottage core or doing all these different cores and all these different Instagram aesthetics and everything. And they're clearly spiritual leftists. And they're clearly, and the ones that are old enough are actual post-leftists from Bernie. And the ones that are younger are clearly spiritually leftists and are just adopting the aesthetic. So don't, like I said, just go back. Don't take people's like self-identification and self-labeling too far, because these people are leftists in any generation before now.
Well said, man. Brian, you got anything to add, or can we want to move to something else?
No, I think we can move on.
Yeah, I think we solved
Let's
the
do
world's
it.
problems. So let's go.
Yeah.
All right. So how do I explain this? I have a young daughter, which you guys know, and most of the audience knows. She is 3.
She's been on the podcast.
She's been on the podcast, yeah. And
She's a representation of pure chaos. Yes.
yes, she is the goddess of chaos for sure. Okay, so she is. It's insane how much like me she is. I raised 2 boys prior. One of them was biologically mine, one was not. And okay, let me back up. Previous to now, I used to think of people as essentially an amalgamation of experiences. I thought very little was like due to genetics. I thought most things were behaviors learned from your childhood and your environment and trauma and all these sorts of things. That's the way I leaned, sort of Jungian or B.F. Skinner or whatever. I think these are all like behaviors that are learned. So, and couple that with like I raised 2 boys. One was biologically mine, one was not. The one that's not biologically mine was more like me than my biological son. So now my daughter is more like me than either one of them, like a spitting image of me, like in ways that she should not be able to. Now, what do I mean by that? So when I was younger, I had a fierce temper. I was like independent to the point of my own detriment. I was a bit of an asshole. I thought I was smarter than fucking everybody else. Everyone else was an idiot. No one could tell me fucking anything. I didn't trust your opinion. I didn't care. I wouldn't let anyone help me ever, since I was a kid till like up into my mid-20s. And, it's just very strong and defiant of anyone ever, like I was literally like diagnosed with, what do you call it? Oppositional defiant disorder when I was a fucking teenager. And so I was, just angry, spitfire, independent, whatever. And nobody was going to tell me anything about anything. And you weren't going to talk me out of doing anything. Like I was going to do it, whether, you were going to stop me from doing something over my dead body. Like just everyone could go fuck themselves. You're not going to tell me anything. And I had a fierce fucking temper that flipped like a switch. So I spent decades doing like working on that to try to change all of these behaviors. I recognize that a lot of these were the results of my childhood upbringing and post trauma sort of behaviors. And I did a lot of fucking internal work and a lot of fucking psychedelics and a lot of reading psychology and philosophy to try to figure out all these things. And a lot of what they call shadow work and all of these. I spent fucking decades. So I'm not like that now. My temper and my anger is very much under control. My daughter has never seen it. She's never seen me raise my voice. Oh, she's seen me raise my voice, but not yell. The only time I've ever done that to her is when she was literally about to die. Like she is a crazy gremlin, and she gets herself into situations where like she's about to get really hurt, and then I raise my voice. She's seen me raise my voice for that, but it's really, that's just the only way to get her to stop, or she's going to the emergency room. And it's not even like I'm yelling like, hey, 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 just yell, raising my voice. Otherwise, she's never really seen me get angry. She's never seen me yell. I've been much better in my older years about, asking for help and being more chill and not trying to work all the time and do everything myself. And, I'm still pretty independent, and I think in a much healthier way than when I was younger. I recognize the value of like sort of collaboration and working together and all these things. So I'm a much different person than when I was in a lot of ways than I was as a young child and as like a teenager to like early adulthood. She's like I was when I was young in ways that she shouldn't be able to, almost like I have passed these things. Like I see myself in her in ways that like she should, like, that make me sad sometimes, because if I think I pass these things along to her through by genetics, because she hasn't seen these behaviors from me. And somebody told me like, well, kids are good about like sensing and picking up things and whatever, maybe it's like a subconscious thing. It's like, no, like I work these things out of me, like we're very chill parents. Like we're fucking anti-authoritarian anarchists. You know what I mean? Like we're very chill, and we just talk to our kids, and we don't we don't bark orders or anything like that. We're both very hardworking and self-motivated and independent, but not in a way that's fucking crazy. And like, she will scream, no, you won't, I'll do it myself. And then she'll struggle and struggle and struggle. And then if she can't do it, she'll fucking throw you know what I mean? Like throw the thing. She'll burst into like fierce anger and defiance. And like, if just crazy, it reminds me so much of her. And then like, I'll try to talk to her like, listen, this is like, this doesn't work, man. Like I've literally been exactly where you are. Like this is not going to work out for you. Like this is not a good idea. Like you got to do things differently. And like I think back to when I was a child, and I'm like, if somebody had tried, if like me as an adult, as an older adult, had gone back to me as a young adult and tried to tell me these things, I would have told me to go fuck myself. You know what I mean? Like, so like, and now I'm at a point where like, she's me. Like there's not going to be no talking to her. Like she's going to do whatever the fuck she wants, and she'll burn down every bridge on the way to do what she wants. So I guess like that was a long way of saying like, do you think that this is genetic? Like all these dispositions that I have, are they like hard genetic? And now I've like passed them down to my kid. Or yes, there is the possibility that like some weird subconscious thing where like she senses these things. I don't know how. Or is it like epigenetic in the sense that like my behavior, because a lot of these behaviors I learned from my father, who is also not biologically related to me. He married my mother when I was 6 months old. So like a lot of these behaviors I learned as a kid were from my father, who is also not biologically related to me. So like that's why like I always lean towards like, no, these are behaviors that you learn, and it's not biologically determined. But is it possible that maybe like I had changed my epigenetics, and that's what's being passed down like through some weird epigenetic memory, and that's how she's learning these things? Like what are you guys' thoughts on this? Because I can't fucking wrap my head around it, but I'm tending to think that like, no, these are genetic fucking things, whether it's like I have changed my genetic, or I changed my genetics as a child to where like now I pass these down to kids, but my other two kids weren't like that. So I don't know what it is.
So the crazy thing is that we don't really know as much as we think we know about how actual genes work. So as it seemed to be fairly understood, but they're discovering new dimensions to these things all the time, from what I understand. So we should never say that, oh, it's so simple, like you say, epigenetics and everything, but like it's really like surprising some of the things they discover. So there's always a you never know that you can kind of add to this, but it could be a matter of chance. It could be a matter of what it could be a matter of is, you don't choose which genes exactly you pass down. I mean, it could be the interaction between your genes, like a genetic expression from your genes and her mother's genes. And think about that, like those two genes that got passed down to make her is what's allowing that to be expressed. It might come from both sides, or it might just be like the interaction. That's just a thought.
Well, just on that, her mother is the opposite of me in a lot of these things. She doesn't get angry. She's very, very chill. She's, I guess, pretty independent, but she has no temper. She's never been in a fight in her life. Like, very, very, like, sort of mild mannered, a little bit of a people pleaser, like just not like me in that way at all. Like, she's a hard worker and she's self-motivated and very, very fucking smart and like sort of independently minded, but she doesn't have any of these other attributes that I have at all. So it's got to come from me. Like, she is so my daughter, she's so much like me. It's fucking weird how much she's like me. Like, I see myself in her all the time. So, Brian, what do you think, man?
Yeah. So this is an Into the Void. So, let's get nuts.
Let's fucking go.
100 to answer your question, 100% genetic. No. Okay. Not 100%, maybe 90, maybe 80, something like that. Okay. But also, first off, we have a real problem with a dichotomy. Kind of like what we were talking about earlier. It's not as simple as, it's communism versus capitalism. No, there's a lot of ideas and hybrids in between and all of that. Just like we have this common phrase, which is nature versus nurture. To Penguin's point that we just don't know, we don't exactly understand how these things work exactly. And so what does nature in that equation, in that question, even in that dichotomy, even mean? And there's a lot we don't know, but, we learn more all the time, or should I say, sometimes we rediscover more all the time. So nature versus nurture is its own problem. And also, because when you also add into that equation the idea of the individual. Now, I firmly believe in individuals and individuality. I do believe that what is in your skull, or underneath your skull, is a bubble that, you have ultimate control over. Ultimately, again, but as much as we are individuals, again, as we all know, we're a social species. We like to commune, we like to build communities. That seems to be, there's a tendency, at least for us within that, which I would also argue is very much biological. So what I want to get at, a couple things. One, epigenetics. I mean, we could talk a little, just for a second on what epigenetics is. So epigenetics it's basically your genes' ability to express things on top of your DNA. Okay, so you're made up of your DNA, but then you have, this gene expression that can happen. And not only that can happen on top of the DNA, meaning that you're more than just your DNA, okay, but not only what's on top of it, but that you can actually control what that expression is. Now, epigenetic, genetic expression through epigenetics can happen through many things. It can happen through life experiences. I guess that's getting into that nurture. It can happen through diet. Perhaps that's a bit of that nurture. It can also happen, if you want to believe, say, the works of like Bruce Lipton, who wrote the famous, and I would argue one of the greatest books ever written, book, The Biology of Belief, in 2005, phenomenal read for anybody to get into. But he would even argue that your own mental processes, and this is where it's not so much nurture, or it doesn't have to be, And I would argue this is getting more into the nature part of it, or maybe a third thing, the power of thought. As we've talked about in previous Into the Voids, the universe comprises of space, time, and thought. But that thought can cause epigenetic changes, okay, in the individual being. So now I'm saying all of that just to kind of lay the groundwork of, okay, if it is epigenetic, what exactly is that? Now, is it genetics? Is it something that you encoded in the DNA, that you encoded perhaps in the very RNA, perhaps that gets transmitted, down the line, as in you have a child, right? So to get to that, RNA, there is this is, in my opinion, this is one of the most amazing pieces of research just flat out ever done in scientific history, just flat out. And it was in 2018, it was in UCLA. And what they did was, not that I'm into shocking animals, okay, even slugs, okay, but in this case, snails. They had snails, and there was one group of snails that they shocked. They just did an electroshock on their tail. Okay, now I don't necessarily approve of this, but the results are what I consider to be one of the greatest finds, I should say, in scientific history. They did the shock, and then they took out the RNA from the snails that had their tails shocked. Now, you can imagine if any part of you, your finger, whatever, was shocked, right, you'd pull back, because it doesn't feel good unless you're into electric chairs, which, I don't know. There's all kinds of people out there. But, it would shock you, you'd feel it, and you'd recoil. I mean, it's just natural. Well, the snails would do the same thing. Okay, they're living things too, so obviously they act similarly. And they took the RNA out of the ones that were shocked, and they put it into the other snails' tails, the group that were not shocked. And when they put the RNA into the control group of snails that weren't shocked, their tails started acting like they were shocked. And so what's mind-blowing about that is those snails did not experience what those other snails did, what the snails that were shocked experienced at all. But the transmission through RNA to the, and just injecting that, putting that into the other snails, they acted as if they did experience it. Now, this is, that on its face is just mind-blowing. Still very controversial. Like the results are not really controversial, but how should I put this? The way the research was done, the rigor was not controversial, but the results are incredibly controversial around this. I don't know why more people don't talk about it, because again, it is mind-blowing stuff. Not, it's not woo-woo, wackadoo, anything like that. Okay. So I think the suggestion stands very tall that yes, you can actually genetically, through the process of procreation, of birth, you can transmit your experiences, your platitudes. Now, Sek, you were saying that you got your, shall we say, you got your chip on your shoulder due to the experiences you had with your parents. Did I get that right?
That's been my thought most of my life. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sure. All right. So those were, in this case, learned traits on your part. And so, those maybe weren't like the chip on your shoulder wasn't passed down genetically in your case, but with your daughter, oh yes, they were. And again, we now have the evidence that that very thing can happen. Now, I want to say that it's more than that as well, but does anyone want to comment? I want to get into maybe the other 20% of where this all comes from, but
yeah, let me jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so following what you're saying and Lipton's work, so the implication would be that I have changed throughout my life. I have changed the expression of my genetics, so that these learned behaviors I acquired in my childhood and young adulthood change the genetic expression in my DNA, and then I pass that on to my child. All of that makes sense so far,
right? But
would not my thought processes since then? I guess my question would be that is the implication then that there's a lag? Here's what I mean. So all of those things changed my genetic expression. All of those things from my childhood and young adulthood and teenager, whatever, changed my genetic expression. But why did the decades of thought processes after that not also change my genetic expression? Or here's my thought, maybe it will eventually. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm in a, you're in a lag. Does this imply that there's a lag scenario for humans where it takes time, so to speak? Like, so for the first or it could be that trauma is a much more effective method of changing genetic expression. But the first decades of my life, or my formative years, changed it much more radically. And then I spent decades changing my thought processes around these things and my behavior. And so maybe 20 years from now, you know what I mean, it will change my genetic expression then, to where if I had a child when I was 60, it would be more like I am now. Do you get what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah. So, okay. So yeah, let's play off that idea a little bit. I wouldn't know that. I don't know that I'd necessarily say there is a lag. There would be a cutoff point, and that cutoff point, of course, would be what could you pass down at the moment of inception, right? You know, of having or inseminating. You know, what would you have there? But here's the difference between us and the snails, to continue with the experiment a little bit, is, say, you know, the shocking or, you know, the RNA from a shocked, say, human group or something, you know, got injected into me. Okay, maybe the first time I might twitch my finger where the other person was shocked. Maybe. Again, this hasn't been done on, you know, there's no human trials as far as I know, maybe in China, I don't know. But regardless, what we have, I don't think we're the only species on Earth, of course, to have this, but what we have as human beings is we have what I call sapience. We can act beyond instinct. And so what I'm getting at is, like, your epigenetic expression through your environment growing up might not have actually changed at this stage, but because you are, you know, wiser, we'll say, you're actually holding that at bay through your thought. Now, granted, Lipton would say that eventually, like, you can actually, like, change that expression, but it's something that requires a whole lot of, I think, even within his arguments. And you have to be careful, because also with Lipton's work, you know, some people like to think that he goes into kind of new age territory and all of this, and I don't know. Anyway, I'm just putting that little warning out there. But ultimately, I think I would go with you know, so like I said, genetics would be 80% of it. Another 10%, then we have 10% beyond that. Another 10%, it comes down to the will, right? Like, do I think that humans have a, shall we say, a genetic predisposition, perhaps, to being able to kill? I mean, I want to say no, and certainly this is a very complex subject to get into. But as Captain Kirk famously said, you know, we can admit that we're killers, but all we have to do is say to ourselves, I'm not going to kill today. And that doesn't, you know, that part of the will doesn't require necessarily, you know, some kind of genetic change within you. So I would attribute it more to that you're just, and as you gave your history, Sec, and as I know you as well, you know, you're somebody that just, no matter what the hell your body's telling you, you push anyway. You know, defiance of the gods. You just keep going. I mean, you're even recording this podcast, and I think you mentioned earlier that you weren't feeling top notch. So, you know, I would attribute it more to that. I mean, do you want to bat back at that at all, or do you have any thoughts on that, Sec? Go for it.
No, I think that fits, because that quote from Kirk there, like, yeah, we're killers, but we can tell ourselves we don't have to kill today.
Right.
My first instinct a lot of the time is still anger. So, like,
sure.
I feel that flash, but I just know how to manage that very well. Like,
right.
I spent a lot of years managing that. So, like, you get that first initial flash of, like, anger, and then it's like, no, like, fucking calm down. This is not helping it. You know what I mean? And so, like, I have great control over that,
right,
through my will and my modification of behaviors, because anger is often not a useful fucking emotion for most situations. So, you know, like, I understand that logically. So, like, I have a logical thought process and a pattern of behavior, but the first instinct is still there it just comes out of nowhere. And that's probably what you're talking about, where, like, that's still my genetics that haven't changed. I have just changed my behavior and how I allow my body to react to things. So that actually makes a lot of sense.
Sure. Yeah. So now if we want to get into the even weirder, or the really weird, there's the other 10%. Okay. So the other 10% I would actually attribute to something that my favorite term is parallel tonality, partly because I think when you use a lot of classical phrases like Akashic record and things like this, I don't think these things exist, but also they come with a lot of baggage. So because then, as Penguin mentioned earlier, what about the mother? Like, wait, what did she inherit from her? Well, what is this? Now, obviously, the child can take, and it's not always the best, but they can take, parts, bits and pieces, from both of their parents. So what seems to preclude someone perhaps expressing themselves, and I don't necessarily mean genetic expression, though again, it could very well be like we're talking about here, but what causes them to express themselves more like, we have these old sayings like, oh, you're your father's daughter, or you're your father's son, or, you're a mama's boy, or you're your mother's son, or something along those lines, right? Because we see where somebody really picked up on all the platitudes and attitudes and attributes, of perhaps one side of the family. Okay. And when you get into that, okay, into that notion, I think that there is this, we all know we generate like electromagnetic fields, okay, from our heart, from really our entire bodily process. And we don't necessarily, I think people might be consciously aware of that. Maybe they're not so much. But at the same time, even if you're consciously aware of the fact that we do that through our biological processes, we don't, we're not, usually conscious of it, even though I think we unconsciously always feel the effects, a certain warmth when you get closer to somebody, even if you're not touching them. Granted, yes, there are temperature changes as you get closer to somebody for sure. But regardless, there's more than that. There is an interplay that happens between electromagnetic fields. Now, those electromagnetic fields have an effect upon neurons. Okay. So a couple possibilities here. And this is part of the reason that I use parallel tonality, because when you say Akashic record, that means like that there's some big mental internet out there that all of us can access, and we can access the memories of everybody, blah, blah, blah. And I just, my understanding of the universe doesn't necessarily allow for that, even though the universe itself is a proto-consciousness field. But I don't want to get too confusing here. Okay. So what you have is a certain mixture, I would argue, though. You have a mixture of both a, shall we say, a local connection with someone through the electromagnetic fields, okay? And then we also have, but there's something a little bit more perhaps where the person's, where say the child in this case, where their brain is it's not just a storage device, it's a receiver. I think we've talked about this already many times on Into the Void, but just to bring it up again, the idea is that they are receiving something extra, something that's in, I don't want to sound so ethereal as in the air, but we can put it that way, that they are picking up, and their brain is just a little more attuned to, say the father's platitudes rather than the mother's platitudes. But a lot of it, I think, can come down to the electromagnetic field and the closeness that perhaps they experience, more closeness, whatever that ends up having to be. But the brain, the human brain, does seem to have attributes, and this comes from things independent to what we're talking about, but has attributes of receiving, not just storing. It's not just RNA. Like there is stuff that gets received as well. And when you include that, this is where, again, we're getting, I'll admit we're being kind of I'm being hypothetical here. But that, a child's brain perhaps could be more attuned to certain directions than others. But that's, I want to always leave that 10% open. Okay. We could just say it was 100% with the previous 90% that we talked about, that it's will and it's genetics. Okay. Or like in the chat, brilliant listener in the chat said maybe it could all just be random. Of course it could. Totally. the chances of that happening are still, there are still chances of it happening. So, in a grand universe, why wouldn't it? Okay, that's fair. But regardless, the idea that there is some kind of shared thought substance between human beings that is conscious or unconscious, dependent upon one's own abilities. Okay. Again, I call this parallel tonality. I'm very open to that because there is something that just leans you in that direction, whatever that happens to be. Or maybe just a greater preponderance of your genetics over the mother's. I mean, it could be as simple as that. But I thought, let's bring in something really strange just to kind of cap it. What do we got, guys? Go for it.
So let me, Penguin, you got a hard stop at 3:30, right? Ish. Okay,
and it's 3:40.
Yeah, 3:40-ish. Yeah.
Right, we'll try to wrap this up.
Sorry, guys.
And, no, it's good. It's good. So let me repeat back what you said, but put it in different terms.
Yeah.
So it just could be the case that, let's remove Akashic record and like sort of collective consciousness, and it just could be that my daughter is more tuned to my subconscious, we'll say, and previous thoughts that I've had and experiences I've had in my lifetime are sort of bleeding over into her subconscious. I guess that's not less wooey than the way you described it, but but that's another way of putting that, I guess, in the sense that she's just picking up on past memories and whatever, not even necessarily like in some sort of extrasensory way, but just like a feeling or an instinct or like something in the back of her subconscious that she might not even be like seeing in her conscious mind, but just kind of bleeds over into the other, and she's just more in tune to my brain, probably because our brains work so similarly.
Sure.
Than maybe her mother, her and her mother, even though spends more time with her mom, which is weird that this would be the case because she spends more time with my wife. But I understand that line of thinking, and that could be possible too. I don't know. I really don't know, but this is sort of changing. It's very interesting to me because it's very much changing, or at least bringing into question the way I thought about things. But I guess
because you didn't get so much into genetics, like biology, you didn't buy into that as much. Well, is that what you're saying? I didn't think anything was really genetically determined. Right. Right.
Either through learned behavior or epigenetics or the power of your own will. I didn't think anything was I thought genetics was something that you could very easily overcome.
Sure.
Especially when it comes to things like your personality and behavior.
Right.
Which still might be the case. It's way fucking more complicated than I thought,
Right. Well, I know we got to wrap up. I want to just make this one last point, because what we're talking, forget about, like Zach said, forget about even the parallel tonality stuff, that stuff that's theoretical and fun. Okay. But like the experiment mentioned earlier with RNA, with snails, that's real. Like that's legit. Okay. And the possibilities that this raises, and what Sek is experiencing with his daughter, what this raises, especially from the biological perspective, is that you are literally dealing with, you, the individual, are dealing with potentially the problems, the traumas, and the joys of people from thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years ago. They are literally in your genes. And it's both powerful and terrifying at the same time, that perhaps, what you see as a personal, boy, I wish I could change this about me. You might actually have to address something. And what could modern psychology possibly do for you with this? But you might be actually addressing a trauma that occurred 100,000 years ago. And I think that that's insane.
It's fucking wild to think about. Yeah. I mean, and to think we try to make laws and we try to do all these other things to try and solve, the human condition, and try to, maybe stabilize the human condition. It's like, what the fuck kind of law could solve a problem
that I can't even, really address, that I can't even imagine when it started. I mean, you can't. We're dealing with a lot of old problems as a species, in my opinion. And that's the conclusion I come out with that. So that's it for me.
Well said. Penguin, you got anything to add before we head out or what?
No, I'm woefully uninformed about this whole topic, so I'm learning a lot.
Right on. Well, Brian, thanks for coming on again, man. This was a blast.
Always.
Yeah, we got it. We got it good and weird right there at the end, so that's a plus.
We have a responsibility to listeners.
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
Take this
seriously.
seriously.
Yeah. You got anything you want to plug?
No, just head over to nwo.red and get all your Lizard Jew action. I mean, get all your great podcasts and and books and who knows what else.
Yeah, you got to get with your fellow Jews there and start changing the weather again, because I'm not happy with it. I would like to speak to the manager. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. I'm on top of it. We got to build the third temple, otherwise the weather is it's going to get worse. No.
All right, everybody, be excellent to each other, and we'll see y'all next time. Peace.
Peace.
Ciao.